Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, and last, but certainly not least, all of you with confirmation bias, we'd like to welcome you to Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, as we sit tucked away in the ancient flood-battered central Pangaea mountain range. We are a podcast dedicated to exploring the fringe with logic, and where we also theorize the fourth dimension exists and is the spiritual.
Here, we're dedicated to pushing science, logic, and the Socratic method to their limits, as we discuss the mysteries and mythologies of the world.
So the main trigger warning for this episode will be a logical conversation, as always, because if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, then we don't know what you're doing here, because that's what we're all about. But there is going to be an additional set of trigger warnings. We're going to be talking about some spooky stuff that's going to end up leading into some mildly gory stuff. I'm not going to put an explicit tag on this episode because we're not going to get into all the extreme details of stuff, but it'll make sense as we go along. So I would say this is definitely not an episode for a preteen audience. That would be my rating, but that's up to you as the listener to ultimately decide.
All right. So we're going to start diving into our squid facts here, because they're starting to build up, and I want to get them out of the way, because I've been
Sorry, I had to do my Squidward impression there.
Okay. That was such a change in my expression. Oh.
Sorry, did that derail you?
A little bit.
Did that make you slip off the ship a little?
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't have your suction cups fastened well enough.
Anyway, so we're going to get into this here. We're going to talk today about the strawberry squid. These guys, they're pretty adeptly named because they look like a strawberry. They have a bunch of chromatophores on them, which those are what they use to change color, and it just makes them look like a strawberry. They also have one giant eye that points up, so they can see things against like the sunlight up top, and then they have a smaller eye that looks down to kind of peer into the darkness a little better. But yeah,
this is sounding a bit Lord of the Rings-esque here. One eye at the top.
Oh,
yeah, you know, Sauron.
I guess
the eye is watching you.
Anyway.
You take one more step, Mr. Frodo, I'll be the furthest I've ever been from Bag End.
I think he says the Shire.
Oh, okay. Potato. I got the gist of it right.
Mostly.
I'll take a 70% credit on that, you know. Like I got C, you know. C minus.
Still passing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I knew the quote, I knew the reference, just not perfectly.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It looks like a strawberry too. So does it still look like a strawberry if it changes color to be like purple or like pink? Or is it just when it's red that it looks like a strawberry? Well, in your expert marine biology opinion.
I may have misspoken. I think they're the photophores. But they're still covered in chromatophores. I think all squid, if not most squid, have them. But no, deep sea squid, they're all pretty much like red. Giant squid can be like silver at times. But yeah, it's because red doesn't show up that well in water. It's one of the first wavelengths to kind of fade out.
Okay, yeah,
so
that makes sense.
It's like a form of camouflage. If you're red in the pitch black in the water, you're invisible.
Is that why Deadpool has a red costume, so he's invisible in water?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, we should probably move on and get back on track here. So today we are going to be discussing a very fun topic. We're going to be talking about Skinwalker Ranch. So I'm going to have a little legal prelude, I guess, here. So if you don't really want to hear legal schmeagle kind of crap, you might want to fast forward a minute or two. I don't know how long this will take. But I tried to get permissions to do an in-depth study on the Skinwalker, Hunt for the Skinwalker book. I actually have it right here. So it's by Colm, Keller, and George Knapp. Highly recommend the book. So I didn't get permissions to go through this in-depth. so I'm not going to this episode. But we are still going to talk about loosely Skinwalker Ranch, and there are some things that are very common knowledge that happened at Skinwalker Ranch. We're just going to crucially hit on them and kind of expand on our thoughts and connect it to other things that we've seen and studied. And I think you, Trace, were going to mention some stuff from the TV show, if it ties in.
Yeah, so I've been binging the show for quite a while. I'm not fully caught up yet. I think I'm in start of season 3. There's 5 seasons at the moment. So I'm not fully versed in it, but I know the gist of kind of what they're doing there. And I'm sure later on we might do a part 2 Skinwalker if there's some more prevalent information that comes up, which I'm sure from the sounds of everything they're doing, there's going to be some interesting things that come out of there in the future.
Or if I actually get an email back from the publisher and permission to do a little bit more of an in-depth study. But
that's true.
From here, we're just going to hit very loosely on a couple of key points. It falls under fair use for me to do this. So that's just for your understanding as a listener. We are going to miss a lot of things you've probably heard about Skinwalker Ranch if you are versed on the subject. If you're not versed on the subject, now would be a good time, well, maybe not right now, but at some point would be a great time for you to get the book. I highly recommend the book if you like the paranormal. It's one of the better reads I've had in a long while. It flows kind of like a detective story with science and paranormal all kind of intermingled together.
Or if you're have struggle reading and like watching shows, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is a great place to go into as well, because they cover a lot of the past stuff that I'm sure is covered in the book as well.
Yeah. So last time I'm going to say this very blatantly is that we're not touching on everything in either of these here. So you want the full story, go there. That being said, I'll probably say once or twice again, go read the book. Go read the book because it's a good book. All right. So first thing as we actually dive in here, moving out of the legal schmeagle stuff, is what are skinwalkers? So skinwalkers are understood, it's a Native American tradition. Not tradition's maybe a strong word. Mythology, yeah. It's a Native American story where witch doctor, it's kind of the next tier of witch doctors, if you will, where there's witch doctors and then there's skinwalkers. And to become a skinwalker after being a witch doctor generally involves some kind of heinous practice, like you go out and you kill some loved one or some very close family member of yours, and then you receive powers to do certain paranormal things like transform yourself into another animal to be able to wear another animal's skin. And that's where the term skinwalker comes from. And the further you supposedly dive into this practice, the more you get. But it usually, from my understanding, involves like patricide or some, killing a close uncle or aunt or, something killing a very close family member in cold-blooded murder is like kind of generally what's required to become a skinwalker. Yeah. Now, it is called Skinwalker Ranch, but there's so much more than just skinwalkers. In fact, skinwalkers are kind of like just the bare bones of what all happens at Skinwalker Ranch.
The Skinwalker is kind of the origin story. It's
right.
It's in the Uinta Basin in
Utah.
And what happened was the Navajo and the Uinta tribes were kind of warring with each other, and I can't remember exactly which one put the curse.
The Navajo.
Okay, so the Navajo put the curse on the Skinwalker curse on the Uintas, and just the whole area just became known as Skinwalker Ridge.
So that's
specifically the mesa that's there. Yeah,
so that's where this Skinwalker Ranch term comes from. Is it's a region that received a curse on it from some Native Americans. And then it transitions into the ranch part when ranchers start coming out and buying up land, and a family buys this ranch, and all sorts of stuff gets really weird. The book is fantastic. The YouTuber Mr. Ballin also has a fantastic highlight of some of the things from the book. He misses a lot, I'm sure, because of the same reason of fair use. But a lot of wild things start happening. So first thing I'm going to hit on is there's orbs that float around, because we've seen this before, Trace. There's a number of different accounts that you see in the Skinwalker Ranch book where there's these orbs floating around that seem to have an intelligence. And in the book, the rancher, he lets his dog loose after these orbs because they have a tendency to float around his property pretty regularly. And the orb kind of disappears into the woods. The 3 dogs tear off after it. And then he hears like 3 different yelps. And he goes out the next morning and his dogs still haven't come back. And he only sees 3 scorched marks on the ground with 3 piles of like small goo, kind of like in Ant-Man when the bad guy like shrunk that one dude that wasn't supporting his project, and there was just a little pile of
just
goop.
A pile of goop.
Yeah, it was kind of like that. And that was all that was left of him. And he said that there was like a horrifying stench. So the implication there is that this orb basically just killed these dogs. This orb also had the power to induce incredible anxiety, like we talked about like in the last episode, how I had that vague feeling I was being watched. That's when I kind of started to correlate it as I'm exploring that and seeing how commonplace it is that these orbs correlated to Bigfoot also are correlated to immense anxiety. And that's kind of when I started piecing all these things together to be like, maybe I did have some kind of paranormal thing that I saw. But I'd also connect this to like things like 411, like The Hunted, when we were watching the end of that there. Dave Paulides proposes that the orbs and Bigfoot are connected. And I was also listening to the podcast Strange Familiars, and they had a guest on talking about Bigfoot, but it went under different names. The Woolly Boogers, I think, was the episode title. And it's just like the southern term for Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And the guest described that these orbs were often, like because she saw some of these orbs, and that they had the same color as like the Bigfoot eyes did sometimes in the night. And so there's kind of a correlation there to where these orbs floating around might also be Bigfoot. And then that also plays into our 4th dimensional thought, where you think about like how would a sphere look going through the 4th dimension? It's like, well, how does an interdimensional being like Bigfoot look going through the 3rd dimension? It's like, is just an orb just another manifestation of how it appears in the 3rd dimension? I don't know. So I'll kick it over to you, Trace, for thoughts on this topic.
Well, orbs are very closely linked to ghosts and stuff like that. And I just heard a theory that what if these Bigfoot are actually the ghosts of like Neanderthals and stuff?
That's an interesting one.
Because if you really look at it, stuff being thrown around, weird noises in the night, it's all exactly like poltergeists.
Yeah,
but in the woods.
That was something they talked about on Strange Familiars as well, is that poltergeist activity, if you just put it outside, that's generally described as a Bigfoot encounter. Bigfoot. Yeah, and I think that's where like people like Phil start going off into the direction of like, okay, these are spiritual entities, they're not of this world kind of a thing.
Yeah. Although I will say, I'd be a lot more scared if a Bigfoot just appeared in my house than if I saw a Bigfoot in the woods.
That's true. And then you also have the thing where there's a lot of different accounts where like the Bigfoot is on the outside and it doesn't really seem to be able to get in.
Oh, just like the outside of the house?
Yeah, and it's like there's something keeping the Bigfoot from being able to come inside in most instances.
Yeah, there's never really been a story about one like breaking in somewhere.
I mean, maybe there was and killed the person and they weren't able to tell. I don't know.
But surviving stories is you never hear of that happening. Yeah,
it's true.
They fully well have the capability. Every other story is they're lifting huge trees or rocks or whatever else. Yeah. So I'm sure a flimsy little door wouldn't stand a chance.
Yeah, that is true. It is almost like there's some kind of interdimensional aspect keeping them from breaking down a door. Because a lot of times you'll hear them knocking on doors and banging stuff outside and climbing all around the house, but they don't come in.
There is like folklore about like the threshold of doorway being kind of a buffer too.
Yeah, like how vampires have to be invited in.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah, and I could see that. Maybe that there's some credence to the fact that, if you have your foot hanging out, you're scared of a ghost grabbing your foot or something because, but if you have your covers on, you're safe. Maybe there is a little bit of credence to that. So, yeah, I don't have a ton on orbs, but that was just, something that stood out to me from the book to be like, hey, there's these orbs that are flying around that seem to have like, the ability to zap stuff. There was one point where the farmer, the guy that was running the ranch, he actually outsmarted it and he like took off running at it and scared it off and then hid in some hay, and then the orb came back and was all confused and looking for him. So the question then becomes, was it just toying with him and did it know, or was the orb actually fooled by that? And that's, a question that's never really answered. That's just kind of up for speculation.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah. Well, again, that's in the book. There's
Yeah.
a ton of, like, I'm seriously just scratching the surface here, folks. Like, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, go buy it. Fantastic book, fantastic read, boost their sales. And maybe email them and say, hey, let MQuad do a little bit of a deeper dive into this.
Yeah.
But that's about all I got for the orbs. Next one I want to talk about is the cattle mutilations. We talked about this with Phil a little bit, but there's these cattle abductions. This is not unique to Skinwalker Ranch. This happens plenty of other places, but it happens on Skinwalker Ranch, where they'll see a cow, and then they'll like leave it be. And then like 15, 20 minutes later, they've got all the other cattle accounted for, and this one's missing. And then they kind of go off and look for a couple minutes, and they find it not too far from where they last saw it. And it's dead. It's been dissected. The blood's been drained out of it. There's been surgical cuts, often removing the sex organs and then certain other organs as well present within the within the creature. And it's just... It's interesting because there is this sexual focus on these abductions a lot of times, and I think that they talked about in the book as well. And I'm pretty sure I've referenced this already when we had Dr. Mastriano on to talk with us about how they would take. I think they did like some kind of control study because there's this lab that's supposed to collect these samples of quote unquote cattle mutilations and examine them, and it always chalks them up to wild animal attacks. So the scientists from Skinwalker Ranch, they took a cow that was I think that was like killed or like something had happened to it where it was like already dead or they killed it, and they did their surgical cuts and they sent samples with their surgical cuts in to say, hey, what is this? And it came back wild animal. They're like, okay, yeah, well, we know you're full of crap. So good scientific methodology there to show that there's bias against some of these things coming to light in the scientific community, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I want to comment on that.
Yeah,
they actually had this happen on the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like I can't remember the preface of it, but I remember them saying it's like, yeah, we just saw these cows fine like an hour ago, and now this one's dead. And they went to it, no blood. They had a vet come out and say it was like possibly pneumonia-induced stress, like stress-induced pneumonia that killed it. But they're like, what would have stressed it out so much?
Yeah.
So when they look back at the footage, they actually had like it was 2 frames of a black dot like flying across the sky, and as soon as it was above the cow got like stood up and like reacted to it. But it was literally like a split second. It's 2 frames of this video. It's like nothing can move that fast. If it was a bird, it would be there much longer.
So for reference, most cameras will shoot around 24 to 30 frames a second for our listeners. So that means within like a 15th of a second, this thing appeared and did something to this cow. But then again, you also have to consider that quantum study that I was nerding out about like 5 or 6 episodes ago, where they found there was another dimension to time. And is it maybe that there's something more going on here where it really isn't just a 15th of a second because of the way they're able to manipulate time being interdimensional?
I mean, maybe. But this thing, it was like above the tree line, and even at that point, it could potentially be like a mile off into the distance, making it even faster at that point.
Right.
But yeah, they also, what they did was they took the corpse and like put it in a corner of the ranch so that the like coyotes and stuff would come and clean it up.
They didn't want it.
Nothing touched it.
Yeah, I think that's a common thread in the book as well.
And that's weird. It's like, what could happen to this thing that nothing would touch it? No vultures, no coyotes, no anything would touch it.
Yeah, it really makes you think too about like cats that stare off in the distance. Man, they're seeing interdimensional stuff happening, and they're just like, what the crap am I watching?
Another interesting thing is that they noticed that the cows would avoid that spot where it died. For like a good while. That's
interesting. So they kind of sense something too.
Yeah, and there was some other stuff that they found at that spot too. But I don't know if I should get into that.
I mean, there is accounts in the book, I think, of like 15 to 20 minutes that they would just look away from a cow and it would be dead and dissected, like surgical cuts dissected. And they're like, how the heck did someone do this in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
But
Now this one, I don't think it was dissected, but
Oh,
it was like there
just
was no
dead.
blood inside of it still.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That being said, it's time for us to hop up into our UFO and take a short ad break here. So please enjoy this brief interlude, and we'll return with you in just a moment. And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, we have beamed back down to you from our quantum interdimensional UFO. Mothman is an interesting character. We just had a conversation with him. Not really.
Yeah, he stopped by for a quick chat.
Yeah, in the 15th of a second that we took an ad break there.
Weirdly enough, our recording equipment stopped working when he showed up here.
Yeah,
It's
and
crazy.
I did manage to get my pocket recorder out, but it was all jarbled in my pocket, and it's like the worst audio quality you've ever heard in your life, and so
Security cameras also blanked out.
Yeah, I know.
For some
It's just-
reason.
yeah, my phone wouldn't record camera. I don't know what happened, man. It's just I could only get a picture of his back, and it's just kind of all blurry and faded and off in the distance.
Yeah.
Anyway, I like that intro or that return there. That was good. So the last thing I'm going to hit on from Skinwalker Ranch, and we're on track for at least this segment to be shorter. There was an encounter with a portal. I don't know if you've seen anything about this on the.
Yep,
Okay,
I've
yeah,
heard of this one.
yeah, where there's like it looked like a yellow light like opened up in the sky at Skinwalker Ranch, and this is when the researchers were actually there, and it wasn't just the rancher. The other instances were usually just the rancher. But these two researchers are out there in the field at night, and they see this yellow light kind of open up in the sky at a distance, and they're like, well, what the heck is that? And there's all sorts of other stuff leading up to this, too, where they were like trying to follow something.
Yeah, these are the researchers that Bigelow brought on.
Yes.
So-
Yeah, this is all from the book.
This ranch has had a few different phases. I guess we maybe should have prefaced that first.
Yes.
Is that there were ranchers. I think there were maybe 2 ranchers that were on it that had weird experiences, and then it was sold off to this guy named Robert Bigelow, and he was
and he kept one of the previous ranch owner on to help out manage the cattle and to kind of guide them through what all was happening. And everything went quiet on the ranch for the first year or so after they bought, like Bigelow bought the ranch, and then things started happening like this encounter. So it just looked like this like kind of yellowish like light, if I'm remembering the story correctly. And then one of the guys had infrared goggles, and he pulled them up. And when he looked at it, he realized that it wasn't just some circular light, that it's actually was like a portal, and that the infrared was able to give the dimensions to the portal. And he saw this like black creature crawling out of it and walking around and he started freaking out. He's like, dude, there's something just came out of that. We got to get out of here.
Is the infrared, was it like temperature?
No, so that's thermal you're thinking of.
Okay.
So
I just because well, if you have another point on this, I have a point on portals.
yeah, so you can go ahead and talk about your
Okay.
portals.
So after Bigelow, also the people that are making the TV show is, I can't remember his name, but another guy bought it and is doing research on it now too. But what they found was they brought out this guy to do like a Hebrew chant at Homestead 2, which is like a hot spot for activity, with the intent of like, the guy was like, yeah, this should open up and like invite interaction. And they had like thermal cams and stuff pointed at Homestead 2. Whenever he started doing his chant, the temperature changed like drastically, and the homestead got like cold. And there was like a point at it that it was like, yeah, this point is where it's all coming from. Like the top of the tree lines were like super hot, but then the house and everything around it was freezing cold.
That's scary.
They also had like LiDAR that they walked around that homestead, but it didn't work inside that building.
That's interesting. Yeah, but then this is interesting, Trace, and I wanted to be able to talk about some of this stuff here. Like, what exactly is IR, like infrared? So it's all on the electromagnetic spectrum, infrared and the color that we see. So like all the colors that we see is just a small little sliver on the electromagnetic spectrum of stuff that's just going on around us. And then on one end of the spectrum, you have like nuclear stuff. And then the other end of the spectrum, you have like radio waves. So it's this huge spectrum, and just this tiny little spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum is like visible light for us. Just outside of that visible light towards the red direction, just beyond our vision, is like infrared. And that's where this comes from. And then this becomes interesting because this is, theorized ways that we can use to observe like paranormal type of activity with using IR capabilities, detecting their electronic signature, all of these different aspects where, if there are indeed interdimensional beings, they should show up somehow, some way on the electromagnetic spectrum if they're actually like interacting with us at any point.
Yeah, because everything is kind of theorized around like voice recordings uses electromagnetic spectrum. The spirit boxes that I brought up last episode are like going through radio waves in the electromagnetic spectrum, and just a lot of stuff surrounds this. So yeah, it would make sense that theoretically they should show up.
Yeah. And so then I wanted to tie this into the Connect thing that we were talking about, because I had mentioned this article like 4 or 5 episodes back, maybe even a little longer at this point. And this one article had a lot of issues with the ways that the study is done. So how the Connect works, for those of our listeners that are new or just don't remember.
It's like Xbox Connect.
Yeah, it's an Xbox Connect, and what it does is it projects out these little speckled IR flashes across like a certain grid sector in front of it, and it'll receive that flash back, and it can gauge based off of like how quickly it receives the flashes back if there's an object or not in front of it to some degree or another. And people will use this to try to track paranormal activity. Now, I'm not going to say that does or doesn't absolutely work, but this one article had some interesting takes on it. And I'm going to read a quote here. And the article will be in the show notes if you want to go read the full article. The Kinect has a large reference library to compare with human shapes, but it doesn't have any filters against other objects that resemble that shape. Keep in mind that the Kinect is relying on the depth sensor for recognition of a player. It is reading the distance of the infrared speckle pattern to determine depths. So that's all pretty much what I just said. Also keep in mind that the software will make guesses on where missing limbs might be based on probabilities. This is why you'll see hands or feet wiggle around when you're in front of the Kinect, holding your hands in front of you or your feet are just off the screen. When the difference in the depth of various object matches images in the Kinect's reference library, it will get confused and assign a stick figure to it. And this is probably what you were talking about with the Gettysburg tour stuff, where they had one of these set up and you see it like laying down to hopping back up to laying down, as where there's maybe just like little dust speckles or something in the room that the IR is hitting and bouncing back off of. And the Kinect has pre-programmed stick figure patterns and human patterns in it, so it's automatically registering it as that because it vaguely resembles it. Well, but in reality, it could just be the dust floating around.
I also want to say they've expanded this technology to outside the Xbox Kinect, because that's not really a thing anymore. So they've expanded upon it, and I'm sure it's like slightly better or different, however you want to say it. I'm not sure the specifics on all those things, but I've seen like videos of like a guy sitting on his couch, and then this thing, like the stick figure, just kind of appears and starts like slowly walking towards him, and then it like touches his shoulder, and then he has like a visible reaction to that.
Yeah, and that's where it's a little bit harder to discount, but this article does also talk about how like they had the person doing this, they did a study with the Kinect, and they took like a trash bag and set it up, and the Kinect was able to generate a stick figure on the trash bag, like outside of like, I think it's normal range or something like that. So you are going to get false positives with this, and that's important to note, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every single account is going to be necessarily false, and that we're not seeing something on the IR spectrum.
Yeah, because this one was like a smooth, besides like a couple like twitch here and there, it was like a smooth movement besides like janky, like its hand is up here, now it's down here, and now it's kind of doing like...
Now it's laying in that Jeff Goldblum pose, now it's standing, now it's in the Jeff Goldblum pose again. That actually makes like fluid sense. And that's where that's a little bit more credible to me, where it's, it was still invisible on the infrared spec. Well, maybe this isn't really capturing stuff in the infrared. It's just flashing stuff out there.
Yeah, it was still invisible on the camera.
Right, still invisible on the camera, but the infrared is at least picking up some form of data if it's not able to see it altogether. And that's where I've talked to you about, like, Pond Bank, not too far from us, is supposed to be like a hot spot for the white lady in white on the lake.
And also potentially some Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I've got infrared goggles, so...
It'd be fun to go out there.
Phil would probably tell us not to. I don't know.
I mean, is it a terrible idea to mess with stuff we don't understand?
Yeah.
Are we gonna do it anyway?
Probably. But you shouldn't do it as the listener. We can take our own risks.
Yeah, this is we're experts in the field.
Yeah, we're totally experts. Absolutely. That being said, that's about all I got for Skinwalker Ranch. Anything you wanted to hit on with the TV series or anything before we shift gears here?
Yeah. I just want to say it's cool because the show isn't exactly. I mean, they're of course still trying to document the weird and paranormal that's happening there, but they're actively doing like studies and showing what they're doing there. So they're going out and like with like Geiger counters and other measuring equipment to measure like we're getting a weird spike here, and like they have whole systems set up that'll detect spikes in like radio wave frequencies. And the only problem I have with them is that they say like, oh yeah, this shouldn't be this way, this is higher than normal, but then they don't show what the normal looks like.
Yeah, you got to see the baseline.
Yeah, that's my only issue with it. But I will say, whenever they have these repeating offenses, kind of, they are like varying in degree. And you can kind of see, like, there's a couple times where it's a clear, like, spike while they're doing some experiment. It's like, okay, that's a little weird that's happening. Or, like, their compasses will get messed up. The one time they were drilling in this one spot, and their compasses started pointing at the drilling location. And, like, that wasn't north. And even the guy brought out, like a compass. Like an old-fashioned compass, and it was still pointing towards the drill where they were drilling at.
I think there's something with compasses in the book as well. I forget what it was, though, because I read that so long ago.
Yeah, and there's just all kinds of weird stuff, but a lot of it is pointing towards, like, there's something weird happening on the electromagnetic wave spectrum.
Right.
And that's really what they're trying to focus on.
Yeah, to try to use it to quantify, because that's the only way that we're able to get anywhere near and quantify and touch this, if you will.
Yeah, but highly recommend the show too.
Highly recommend the book.
Yeah, there's plenty of other stories I could probably talk about here, but just watch the show.
Yeah, just read the book.
You'll learn more then, and it's much more of like a
shock
factor than hearing two guys talk about it.
Yeah, I read a lot of books. I'm not always the fan of books. I like to read to learn, but sometimes reading books is like understimulating for me. It's kind of boring at times. But I will say the Hunt for the Skinwalker was definitely a page turner for me, as someone that likes a good story and like scientific methodology all tied into one. So that being said, Trace, why don't you give us our creature fact?
Okay. All right. I have to pull this up. I wasn't aware that we were getting into this right away. Okay, so this was at a request. The Amphicyonidae. It is a extinct bear dog, pretty much. Prehistoric creature that's just a giant bear / dog kind of thing. I'm trying to. I should have read up a little more on this, but yeah, it's
a bear dog.
Bear dog.
When did they theorize this existed? At least from the evolutionary standpoint, because it's extinct. Yes.
Yeah, it's extinct. It's found a good bit of the world, most of southern U.S., Midwestern, into Mexico, also along the north and eastern sides of Africa. There's a little spot. I'm not really sure where that is. Below Korea, I think. It is from the Miocene era, which is 23 to 5 million years ago.
Yeah, so evolutionary perspective or creationist perspective, at the very least extinct and a long time ago, depending on how you want to split hairs on that. But yeah. No, it's interesting. So describe bear dog for us a little bit, Trace. Like, what is that? Because bears kind of already have a little bit of a pupper appearance to them.
Yeah.
Am I putting you too much on the spot here?
A little bit.
All right,
I'm prepared here.
I'll let you read Mr. Unprepared, and I'll do a quick follow-up. This was a while ago at this point. This is the same week that the episode released, but there was a comment from one of our listeners about not liking Joe Rogan that I want to address. Mainly the reason I said I'm not a big fan of Joe Rogan was because he had Billy Carson on, and I just don't like giving a platform to people that lie. So
Yeah.
that was
I just don't like Joe Rogan.
okay. I'm not the biggest. Sometimes he has really good guests on, like when he had the Admiral that had the Tic Tac sighting. That was a really good episode. But then there's other things too where he'll just get his history wrong, like about Jesus and stuff like that. And he's definitely. I have respect for him in the sense that he was the forerunner of like podcasters in a sense.
Yeah, he's definitely a big influence in podcasting is becoming popular, but doesn't mean you have to like him.
Yeah, so I'm not the biggest fan of how he approaches a lot of stuff, and his sometimes he has a good credible approach, sometimes he really doesn't, in my opinion, like how you heard from our guest Dr. Mastriano. Joe Rogan would have a lot of claims that would disagree with that about Jesus. So stuff like that that makes me not the biggest fan of Joe Rogan. Yeah. So that being said, why don't you dive back into our creature here, Trace? I don't want to try to say it because I'm going to butcher it.
Okay,
I'm a xenophade.
Jeez, it is a weird word. Amphicyonidae.
Amphicyonidae. Let's just call it the bear dog. That's easier.
Yeah, bear dog. The Amphicyonidae is like the scientific name for it, which is a lot of like prehistoric animals are like their common name is their scientific name. I mean, Spinosaurus is that way. Tyrannosaurus Rex is the scientific name. Yeah. I wish we used more scientific names in today's society because that would be cool.
Yeah, Latin's hard.
Yeah, fair. But common names get jumbled up a lot.
You have anything more for us? You have more information on why this is a bear dog in comparison to like other bears?
So, taxonomy-wise, it is classified as a wolf that it evolved kind of into a bear. It is in like a sister clade to bears on the taxonomy side of things. Description-wise, it's just kind of a wolf in a bear-like body form. They can be, I guess this is just the general family, but amphicyonids ranged in size from as small as 5 or 11 pounds to 220 to 1,700 pounds.
I wonder how that contrasts to grizzly bear.
I don't know. I feel like grizzly bears might be a little bigger.
I feel like probably. I'm going to look that up real quick. Say something else smart about the bear dog.
They were hypercarnivores or mesocarnivores, which are also called obligate carnivores.
Did you say 1,300 pounds or
1,700 pounds?
Oh, this thing's more than the grizzly bear then.
Oh.
Grizzly bear only goes up to about 1,000 pounds.
Really?
Yeah. At least from this loose search I'm doing on Google.
They seem a lot bigger.
Apparently this is like something freaky, man. Can you imagine that? Like something almost double the size of a grizzly bear.
Oh, I mean, yeah. And like prehistoric animals, you have like the dire wolf, which is like double, triple the size of normal wolves. You have the dire bears. They're huge.
That's wild.
They are wild, yes.
All right. So plot twist, Trace. We are not done recording, but we are going to take an ad break.
Okay.
Please stay tuned as you hear paranormal activity banging around in the distance. Not really. It's just my daughter playing upstairs. But hang around. We'll be back shortly with part 2 to this episode. And we have returned to talk about spooky things. So Trace, I woke up this morning and I pulled open my phone and I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw this really interesting story that I had to just dive into. And so we were just going to do Skinwalker Ranch today, but this episode turned into a hybrid episode because of this one Instagram video I watched, where it told me about this one location that kind of just blew my mind a little bit. So we're kind of doing a double piece here to the episode, if you will. It's like an episode within an episode. And I was thinking about it too. Literally the second I watched the video, I'm like, dude, I got to do an episode on this thing. And then I was like, wait, we're doing Skinwalker Ranch tonight. This is perfect.
I remember you sending me something. I didn't see the original message. I just saw you started texting like, no, actually, I'm not going to send that.
I just deleted it all.
No context for it.
Yeah. So that being said, Trace, I'm going to open the can of worms here. Have you heard of the Valley of the Headless Men?
Yes, because you told me to look it up.
I told you to not look it up.
Oh.
Man, you need to read.
You just said, have you heard of it?
I said, if not, don't look it up.
I must have missed that part.
Yeah, it's all right. That's fine. So you did look it up.
I saw like an extreme cursory glance at it.
All right. So it is in Yukon province of Canada. So that's right next to Alaska. It's right next to Yellowknife, which is kind of like northeasternish, that direction of the province itself. So this is kind of more like middle of Yukon, more or less-ish. I might be a little bit wrong on that exact geography here. But the tales from this place, man, blew my mind. And honestly, this is more exciting to talk about than Skinwalker Ranch. Like I was getting all excited and kind of bouncing around a little bit as I'm like, we're about to transition into this. I'm like, heck yeah, let's go.
Kicking his feet like a little schoolgirl.
Yeah. That was uncalled for.
I had to do it.
It's a little rude. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Valley of the Headless Men. I'm just going to refer to it as Headless Valley at this point. Because that's just shorthand. And episode titles are a thing, and I want to keep the episode title short. So Headless Valley works a lot better than Valley of the Headless Men, for an episode title. Yeah. So it's a park reserve in Canada, made into a park reserve fairly recently. I would say, I think like since the 50s or 60s, maybe a little bit more recently. It's largely unexplored. It's a place that is vastly like untouched by man in contrast to most other. It's renowned for its beauty. Those pictures of like the mountains and the crystal clear lake and everything that you often see?
Yeah.
It has kind of some aesthetic like that in certain regions, at least from what I was able to see in pictures and all that. So what it is you can't access it by road, even though it's like a reserve or a park. You can't get into it by car. You have to raft into it or pack into it. Like there's no other way. It is that wild and that rugged. And what it is it's like a main shoot off of a river in a canyon with 4 other canyon offshoots. At least that's my cursory understanding of this location. So pretty cool in terms of design. It's about 11 miles long in its duration, like its length. Nearby is also a mountain range known as Funeral Range because there's a lot of planes that tend to crash into that mountain range. So it's kind of Bermuda Triangle-esque to a small degree here.
There is a like a Alaskan triangle, I think, near the Yukon Peninsula as well.
Huh. That's interesting.
I think I brought it up in
I don't remember
one of the creature facts.
You need to dive into that. Yeah. Well, not too much because you don't want to go missing in the Bermuda Triangle.
I'd be okay with that.
Okay. You want to go mess around with fairies?
Yeah.
Do a Rip Van Winkle, wake up 100 years later.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be a good sleep. This one quote from Fodors.com, I'm putting all the articles I used for sources for this in the show notes, but the Fodors.com describes this as, quote, more like Mordor than Canada. I figured you'd appreciate that with your Lord of the Rings love.
Okay.
So the story. What is the Headless Valley here? The Headless Valley it starts off, of course, with Native American lore. It starts off with the Dene tribe that generally inhabit the area. And they talk about how this region was once inhabited by the Naha tribe. And the Naha tribe was very warlike. They'd often come down and, attack the Dene unprovoked. And one day, we don't know when because this is just oral tradition, but the Naha the whole tribe just vanishes. Like they're just gone. Just one day, just completely 100% gone.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I don't know what you wanted me to say there.
I was trying to figure out something for a follow-up here, but never mind. It's fine. So they may consider it an evil place, of course, a haunted place. There's a lot of spooky things that happen. Even the Native Americans within the last 100 years or so have reported that, like in the region, have reported that there's freaky creatures and stuff that'll walk around there. And why I had you do your creature fact on the bear dog is because supposedly the bear dog has actually been reported to have been seen here, like by people in passing, which is very interesting that you talked about how it was largely within, the southern and central America, region that, hey, this would make sense. It's an untouched region by man. Maybe this thing is still alive here.
Yeah, but how would you, because its range was not really far north like that at all. It was Central America and Midwest to like southern East America, and then north and east along like the coast there, kind of like from the Mediterranean to the Indian. That's where the range kind of was, and then there was like a line going straight across through like just Asia. There is like straight across, and then there was a spot on the east coast of Asia right below Korea.
Right, but if we follow the land bridge theory, they would have had to have passed through there at some point because Yukon is very close to where the land bridge would have been.
I mean, maybe, so but they still weren't like up north at all, so that's interesting.
It's interesting either way. I'm not saying there's any credence to the sightings, but it would definitely be cool to have checked out. You might not think so at the end of this episode, though, because we're just starting to scratch the surface. So this place is also rumored by the natives to be home to the Nakani that are supposed to be hairy giants that eat people.
Okay.
Sounds a little Bigfoot-esque.
Yeah, a little bit there.
Also might sound a little bit like the Anunnaki.
I don't really know much about them, to be honest.
Yeah, it's fair.
Besides, a lot of people say that
like
they
Billy
were
Carson.
Yes.
We'll dive into the Anunnaki when we get to Sumerian. That's coming up after our deep dive into paranormal stuff here. All right. So, I mean, in the late 1800s, some people explore this region here, but stuff really starts picking up around 1905 when 3 different explorers go out to this region here and they're gold prospecting because this is, when the gold rush is going on. And they're like, hey, this is an untouched region. Let's go check out and see what's there. And so they find some gold and they come back, and one of the crew decides to stay behind because the rest of them are going to go, like the other 2 are going to go back and do some more gold panning. And they pick up another person, part of the crew, and all 3 of them go out there and they're never heard from again. So they mount up a search party that goes out into the wilderness to try to find this missing crew after a couple of years or something like that even. And they find that there's 2 dead people on the shoreline at one point. And one of them is, so they're both decapitated. That's one thing that very much stood out. And I think by this point, they're largely decomposed. Like, there's not much of like anything left. So it's mostly just like skeletons.
Yeah.
But one of these 2 is decapitated, and he's also reaching for a rifle that was leaned up against a tree.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. Are there pictures of this?
This is like 1905, so I don't think so.
Oh, man.
But supposedly the 3rd person was never found. So, okay, you could, the go-to from that kind of story is like, okay, maybe gold guy got greedy, wanted to kill the other 2, killed the other 2, decapitate him for some reason, took the gold and left.
Yeah. Fair
enough theory, I suppose. The RCMP, I suppose they would be the RCMP at the time, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I don't know, whatever law enforcement they had in 1905, probably RCMP, ruled that it was wild animals that just chewed the heads off.
Okay.
And, that the bodies were just left, which is like, why would they take the head?
Yeah, that's weird in itself.
Yeah. So that's where it started getting its name of being the Headless Valley of the Headless Men. So a little bit of a freak story there. Another guy decides to go in there gold prospecting. I think it's like 1910 to 1920 range, something in there. I don't have the exact date in front of me. He actually decides he wants to build a cabin out there because he's going to winter over there. And he's going to have some people come out and meet up with him the next spring. and his cabin gets burned down. He dies outside, and he's found decapitated as well. And then same thing.
That's weird.
Okay, so maybe same guy stuck down there or something, whatever. It starts getting freakier and freakier. There's a bunch of hunters that go out there in, I think, the 1920s, and there's this one female that goes with them. Her name is Annie, and she's out there, and this group of hunters sleep the night, and they wake up, they're looking for Annie, and she's gone. They can't find her anywhere. Like, she's just gone. And supposedly, like, some chief saw something that night, and when he hears that there were, like, people looking for a woman, he goes and talks to the RCMP, and he's like, hey, I saw a woman that looked possessed, naked, running up the side of the mountain into the wilderness. And I, like, thought about helping her, but she's, like, naked, and she had a deranged look to her, so I just decided not to.
Okay.
And she was never found.
Interesting.
One other thing I forgot to mention about this, Trace, is that there's a network of, I believe, limestone caves all throughout this canyon area. So, like, you're stuck at the bottom of this canyon when you're in there. You're kind of like rafting, like whitewater rafting at certain points, and then, like, you know, it smooths out at other points. You're stuck in a canyon for the majority of your time traversing this region, and you're looking up all around you, and there's just all these cave openings, and most of them have never been explored, even to this day, never been explored. You know, some of the bottom ones, yeah, we managed to get in them, but like the majority of the upper level ones, nope, no clue what's in there. So we really have no clue what's going on here. And then you have another instance happen where someone else goes out there later, builds another cabin. The cabin gets burned down. They blame it on the pipe stove having issues. The person dies inside this time, though. They're not decapitated. But because of the way it happened, in one of the articles I was reading, they theorized that he should have been able to get out no problem because the fire started like at the roof. So he should have been able to use the door, but he didn't. Huh. So, you know, you start getting a lot of weird things like that. You have a couple other, I'm not going to hit every single one here. You have a couple other people disappear between 1910s to the 1940s range. From what I could find, the gold was never recovered in any of these like things. Like people, like maybe people would make it out with small amounts of gold, but like the gold they were prospecting for, that they died prospecting for, was like almost never found. Like there was just no mention of it, at least from the articles I was seeing. Yeah, there was one more decapitated in the 1930s. I think that was the guy with the cabin burned down. Maybe not, actually. No, I think that was another one. So there's like 4 different people that got decapitated over the span of like 25 years. And, you know, after like the 1950s, people stopped kind of just going in there because they're like, man, like stuff happened in the 1940s there. And so people stopped going in, you know, disappearances and all that kind of wind down. And then 2005, there's a really weird disappearance that happens. Well, disappearance because they did find bodies. But this starts sounding 411-like to me, at least. I'm going to hear what your thoughts are. So one person is found in brush with their hands burned. I forgot to grab the distances. I think it was like 3 miles from... So, okay, let me back up. They built some cabins near where this like area is, like just kind of on the cusp of it, I think. I don't think there's like cabins deep in there. But there's these 2 guys go out there and they're staying in a cabin out there, right? And the one guy is found like 3 miles from this cabin with his hands burned in the brush, dead. And don't think it was like really ruled as to any like cause of death other than like exposure or something, you know, bullcrappy like that. Mm-hmm. And then the other person is found, I think, like 8 to 10 miles away in water, drowned in an area that had been searched multiple times. And that's where it starts kind of sounding a little bit 411 like, where there's a lot of searching going on. So actually the family got a little bit upset because they felt that the RCMP did not conduct this investigation properly, because they ruled it out too quickly as being just, exposure and, an accident happened, when it happened to 2 distinct people that were found in 2 very different places. And then another fact that got left out to some degree and not really checked out, I think, was that there was evidence of a firearm being discharged inside the cabin. Like there was a shot into the ground, like into the floor of the cabin, which is really interesting. And so the case got reopened in 2018, I think, or at least was slotted to be reopened in 2018 from a news article I saw. But I don't think there was much else about it after that. So it's a pretty freaky thing because you have, depending on the sources you're looking at here, 20 to 44 people have gone missing / died.
Yeah, when I saw it, it said 44 people were discovered headless in the last 100 years.
Okay, well, yeah, that didn't seem. I wasn't able to find sources that said 44. It looked like there was 4 people that were found headless, but
that was just a cursory glance.
Yeah, so I don't know. 20 to 44 people have disappeared. At least 4 have been found headless, and every single time it looked like it was chalked up to just animals gnawing their heads off. So, well, we're gonna take a short break, our final break, and then we'll come back with final thoughts on the Headless Valley. Yeah, so Trace, we're back, by the way. Trace brought up that it's the Nahanni Valley. Yes, that is what it's referred to. In more,
that's the technical term for it.
That's the tasteful
Valley.
term.
Yeah,
instead of the Headless Valley. That being said, Trace, I was looking and I did a YouTube search to see if I could find some audio stuff about it, because Mr. Ballin has some good content on this. He does the story. Mm-hmm. He tells the story very well. He does all his stories really well, in my opinion. But I saw that there was a whitewater rafting trip there. You want to go?
No.
You want to mess around with ferries?
I just don't want to do whitewater rafting.
Oh, so you would go there if there wasn't whitewater rafting?
I mean, yeah.
All right. We need to start an MQuad exploration fund where people can donate to us going and exploring this kind of stuff. I don't know. We probably should do something like that. I don't know. That'd be cool. It was $7,000 for a whitewater rafting trip, though.
Yeah, whitewater rafting gets a little expensive.
Yeah, that's a bit expensive, but
it'll make you want to lose your head,
lose your mind. Headless Horseman. Oh man.
Oh, we should do an episode on that. That would be fun. I love the Headless Horseman.
I love your hammerhead necklace that you have, or not necklace, wrist bracelet.
Yeah, my necklace.
I'm tired, man.
Yeah.
It's a mood. It's going around. I'd rather be tired than headless, though.
Sure.
So that being said, Trace, what are your thoughts on the Headless Valley? Since you had not really heard about it, I'll send you the Mr. Ballin YouTube video. That's a good one to kind of summarize everything that happened there.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little more because it just seems... I mean, just the story alone of the headless guy that's reaching for his gun is enough to okay, that's weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, the naked crazy lady running through the woods is very witch-like as well. So I wonder if there's any correlation there.
Yeah. And then you see things too where Bigfoot are supposed to be sometimes interested or more attuned to women at certain points, I think. Where they kind of seem a little bit more aware and sensitive to their presence, maybe for breeding purposes. I'm just purely speculating.
Are you saying Bigfoot are hitting on our women?
Maybe. I mean, maybe that's what women mean when they're saying they'd rather be lost in the woods than, go on a date with a guy or something. I don't know. They'd rather hang out with Bigfoot.
If I had the chance to go on a nice date with Bigfoot, I would take it.
Would you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a nice little walk with him would be nice.
Maybe that's a question we need to ask our future guests. Be like, hey, if Bigfoot asked you just to go hang out for a day, would you do it?
100%.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
Why would I not?
I don't know, man. That's how you go missing 4-on-1, I think.
There actually is an old story about someone who got abducted by a family of Bigfoot and actually spent a week with them.
That's
before
cool.
he finally got away.
Well, there's Native American legends about the Bigfoot tribe. They'll refer to them as an actual tribe of people, but just different and bigger and hairier, and that they're sometimes warlike, sometimes not so much. And so even the Native Americans have acknowledgement that, hey, these things exist. And
yeah.
I don't know, man. Then you got to start asking the question, okay, if these things are paranormal, why are they in tribes and families? That doesn't seem to make sense to me so much. That
maybe that's just the way that they could explain it.
Maybe, I guess, yeah. But
maybe they're more abundant then too, because there's more wilderness, more chances to hide. Now it's not so many. And
I mean, there wouldn't be a difference in the amount of Bigfoot unless we went to war with them secretly or something and killed a whole bunch.
well,
The Secret Bigfoot Wars by Abraham Lincoln.
I do not have the source for this. I just want to throw that out there.
Oh boy.
It'd be interesting to go down this rabbit hole, but I've heard a story about this guy who was like tracking a family of Bigfoot, and like he kind of like loosely followed them around. He wasn't trying to be too obtrusive because he, like, you know, knowing what I know now, it's like, okay, he probably did it because he probably stayed too far away so he didn't like interrupt or like scare them away or anything. But
Right.
I remember, like, the story goes that a bunch of like military helicopters like flew in the direction of where they were, and then he just like couldn't find them anymore. So who knows? There could be a secret government war against Bigfoot.
I mean, you do see in some of the 411 stories where special forces get called in to help search for some of the missing people in like the North Carolina area specifically, like near where the special forces would train. Dave Paulides gets some of his details about like units and stuff wrong though, I think I forget what it was. There was something I was reading and I'm like, this doesn't quite seem to add up. So I don't know. Maybe that's just his ignorance, you know, looking in and not being too familiar with certain like types of units, or
Well,
because I think he like references like the Rangers at one point, but then he correlates them to the same thing as Special Forces. And unless you're Ranger tabbed, like, you know, those aren't the same like thing. You might think they're the same thing if you have a Ranger. You don't know. That's fine. But like, yeah, they're not the same thing. Basically, they're very different.
I will say, if they're sending out these special forces, Rangers, whatever they are, where close to where they're being trained, it would kind of make sense. It's like, okay, this is kind of a training exercise, but it's also to actually help. So
Right.
like, why not use the resources while they're right there?
That's true. And there are sometimes the National Guard actually gets called up to like go help and look for missing 411 people, but it doesn't happen all that often. I think there was one or two points where the Special Forces came into an area where they weren't like super close to initially for their training. And that they were decked out in like all sorts of like thermals and IR and M4s, I think. 'Cause I might be getting the details wrong. It's been a while since I've read that section of the 411 book. That's something I want to dive into soon too. I emailed the publisher recently to see if we can do a deep dive into that. So maybe some point next year we'll be able to have a discussion on the missing 411 in correlation to all of this.
Yeah.
But that was the thing that kind of blows my mind, Trace, is it's like, you know, 411 was the gateway drug kind of thing for me, right? I get into all this stuff, and then you start listening to and looking into it all, and you see these orb things in the missing 411 The Hunted, and it's like, okay, what is Dave Paulides doing here? Like, this is weird. You know, you have ape noises in the woods, you have orbs floating around. What's going on? Mm-hmm. Then you start listening to other accounts with like the woolly boogers and strange familiars, and you start seeing connections there where it's like, okay, this starts to sound a little bit familiar. And then you see synchronicities of the missing 411 cases to where Headless Valley. I don't know if Dave Paulides chalks any of these up, because I only have the 411 East book right now. I don't know if he chalks any of the 411 West up to the Yukon, Yukon province.
I think his 411 books are more of in the U.S.
He goes up into Canada some, I think. I think so. I don't know. Maybe not. But anyway, he has a whole slew of stuff. I think he's talked about like how there's 411 disappearances all over the world. But it started with U.S. research. That you're right on. I'll have to look into it a lot more. That'd be interesting. Maybe we can get him as a guest at some point. I don't know. We might not do that. I feel like we're the small enough podcast. He'd probably be like, yeah, I don't really care about you guys.
That would be really cool, though.
Dave Paulides, the secret Bigfoot hunter, is too big for us. I don't know. That sounds kind of suspicious. But yeah. But the more you start studying all this stuff, the more you start seeing patterns emerging where it's like the 411 topic correlates to Headless Valley, which I don't think is necessarily a 411 topic.
Yeah.
It's like this starts to sound familiar at certain points. And I don't know.
I mean, that could just be a bias. as well, just because you're familiar with something.
I don't think so though. It's a pattern. Because I noticed that.
Well, it's definitely a pattern.
One article like that was talking about the 2005 disappearance talked about how it was the phrase he was found in water that had been previously searched multiple times. That was what stuck out to me. It's like, how many times have I heard that in Missing 411 where they're found in an area that was searched multiple times?
Yeah.
And it's stuff like that where, okay, maybe his body was just upstream and drifted down.
That's what I was just thinking.
It could be, but you start to wonder. And then you have the, what were they called? I got to look up the word I had written down. But why can I not figure this out in my own notes? The Nakani. The hairless Bigfoot-like creatures. You have instances of them being seen. And how much of that, like that bear dog, if it's Bigfoot living in there, how much of that could be chalked up to being the bear dog? Or vice versa, how much of it being bear dog-like creatures living in there could be chalked up to being these Bigfoot, man-eating creatures?
Yeah.
So, a lot of unanswered questions. It's time for us to go whitewater rafting.
I'm good.
You were the one that was just like last couple episodes, I'm going to start going messing around with fairy rings, man. Now it's like, dude, let's go.
Yeah, that doesn't mean I want to go whitewater rafting.
Aren't you Mr. Marine nerd? Like, don't you like the water?
Not whitewater rafting. Besides, that's freshwater.
Oh, okay.
Freshwater's lame.
Okay. All right. Well, you got anything else, Trace?
No.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, all of you out there, conspiracy theorists, this one leans your way a little bit. Missing 411 enthusiasts, definitely leans your way. We thank you for tuning in on this, what number is this episode? Let's see. Oh, 24. 24th episode of Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, as we dive deeper into the mysteries and mythologies of the world. We invite you to quantumly transcend time with us and email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. We love to hear from our listeners, unless you are ridden with logical fallacies, at which point we will ridicule you silently and ignore your email on the show. Not really. I don't know. We need to do a logical fallacy series soon. It's coming. Mm-hmm. We invite you to send us your confessions, concessions, contentions, snide remarks, whatever you like about the show, whatever you don't like about the show. Please give us a follow. If you listen this far, clearly you like our content, or at the very least you think we're wacky enough to be entertaining to you. Yeah. So we invite you to please, give us a like, subscribe, follow, whatever the method of support is on your podcasting platform of choice. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at m.quad.musings. I'm doing all this from memory, so that's why I'm kind of like stumbling through it here.
You'll find it around somewhere.
Yeah, you'll find us too,
We'll find you.
Whoa, okay. They got a little psyopy, all right. You can also find us on Facebook on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix --mquad. That's us. And whether you've been listening to us quantumly from on the earth, above the earth, or below the earth, we thank you for tuning in on this fine, cryptid paranormal evening, and we invite you to have a spooky rest of your night.
Toodles.